this is a story that doesn't directly involve me, but it shows me, I was there, was present, it shows me how Prabhupada's desire to encourage the devotees when the devotees needed encouragement. And once again, his, great attention to detail and his focus on the deities. And it was during a Bhagavatam class, and Narayani Mataji was the head pujari for Radha Govinda. And Srila Prabhupada, during the class, he said, "Oh, who has dressed Radha Govinda?" And at that stage, Narayani was extremely shy, and she didn't want to put her hand up. And again, Prabhupada said, "Who has dressed Radha Govinda?" And all the devotees are turning to her, and eventually she very shyly put up her hand, and Srila Prabhupada gave her this beautiful smile and said, "Thank you very much." It was such a lovely, kindness and compassion, and she was very excited about that because she was a very devoted pujari for Radha Govinda. And at that stage, I was still a bhaktin, and they really needed a pujari for Jagannath, Balaram, Subhadra. So Garga Muni Maharaj wrote to Srila Prabhupada and said, "We have one Australian devotee here. Would you be able to give her, or would you kindly agree to give her first and second initiation?" I never saw the letter, but this is what Garga Muni Maharaj had told me. So Prabhupada agreed, and then I travelled back to Vrindavan. At this stage now it's 1974. So this was Janmashtami, 1974 in Vrindavan, and Srila Prabhupada gave me first and second initiation together. And it was an amazing ceremony. And after the fire yajna, those who were receiving the Gayatri lined up to go into Srila Prabhupada's room. So at that stage we would just go in by ourselves. So there was Srila Prabhupada and myself. And Vishalini, who was a dear god sister of mine, she had given me a couple of instructions. I said to her, "What should I do when I go in and see Prabhupada?" She said, "Well, Prabhupada really likes it if you smile. So give Prabhupada a really big smile." And she'd also very kindly lent me a very glamorous forest green sari full of sequins. And I was used to wearing, very humble cloth, life member leftovers or whatever, And so she dressed me up in this thing. And because it was forest green, she decided she'd stick leaves. I thought I'd look really good with bits of trees stuck in my head. So I presented this very interesting spectacle, I'm sure. And I went into Srila Prabhupada's room, and I bowed down and sat up and fixed this really broad grin on my face, biggest smile I could muster with bits of trees hanging out. And Srila Prabhupada, in that situation, he displayed his great interest for Prabhupada's daughters, for his female disciples. And he said to me, "Oh, you are from Calcutta?" And I went, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm from Calcutta Temple." And he said, "Do any men go upstairs into the women's quarters?" Now, for anyone who doesn't know the geography of, or the layout of Calcutta Temple, let me explain that the women at that stage lived upstairs in the roof room, and we would have to go down the stairs, and we would have to actually go through the men's bathroom to get to the temple. So it wasn't congenial, we'd all gather before Mangaladi, bang on the door, "Hari Bol, Mataji's coming through," and then we'd have to barge through, hoping we wouldn't get contaminated by bath water, because the brahmacharis and whatever still kept on bathing. So Prabhupada was aware that it wasn't congenial. And he asked that question, and I said, "No, Srila Prabhupada, they only come up to get their suitcases." And Prabhupada was satisfied with that, because their suitcases were stored on the room. On the roof. And then Prabhupada called me over, and I sat right next to Srila Prabhupada, literally an inch from him. And he held out his lotus palms and showed me how to chant the Gayatri. And by a miracle, I was able to pronounce the Sanskrit properly. He didn't correct me. And, I promised him that I'd follow the 4 regulative principles always. And that was a wonderful experience of Prabhupada's great concern. Another example I wanted to talk about to illustrate Prabhupada's concern for his and love for his female disciples was in Mayapur, one incident occurred where I was picking flowers in the field that was just in front of the Lotus building. And Prabhupada was up on the balcony, and he said to his servant, who I think it was Harisori, who later relayed it to me, he said every flower she picks is a step towards Krishna. So it was very wonderful, Prabhupada's observation. Another example of Prabhupada's kindness and tolerance was this, one time I was able to take up Srila Prabhupada's plate. This was usually Vrindavan Biharini's good fortune. This one time she said, Krishnarupa, why don't you take this up for Prabhupada? And his evening plate was comprised of a cup of hot milk, a guava with some, spices. But this day she had a bowl of cream. I didn't know for sure what it was, so I said to her, oh, what's that? And she said, oh, that's Shah. And I was a little puffed up, still am puffed up, but I didn't want to ask her. I didn't want to reveal my ignorance. What's Shah in Bangla? So at that stage in life, or rather in ISKCON, Prabhupada, we were told, did not like us to use the words, I think. We either knew or we didn't know. So this was always very uppermost in our minds, not to speculate. So, of course, I went up to Prabhupada's room in Mayapur. There were a number of sannyasis also talking to Srila Prabhupada. I went in, put the plate on Prabhupada's desk, offered my obeisances, and just as I was putting my head up, Srila Prabhupada said to me, pointing to the bowl of Shah, what is that? And then my immediate reaction was to say, I think. And as soon as I said those words, I blushed bright red, thinking, oh no, I said, I think, directly to Srila Prabhupada. I think it's cream, Srila Prabhupada, and kind of mentally hitting myself on the head with a shoe. And Prabhupada didn't say anything. He was very tolerant. He didn't say, what do you mean you think? You know or you don't know? He didn't say, oh, thank you. And I left the room. And that was in 1975. So since then, and we're now 2016, I have learnt that lesson that if you don't know something, just ask. And I've used that in my professional career and also my devotional career. If you don't know, just ask. No matter how stupid it seems, just ask. That was a very good lesson. Living in Mayapur and seeing Prabhupada very, very often, but not being able to go on morning walks with him, being in a female body and having a lot of service to do in the mornings, of course, which included cleaning Prabhupada's room. So this one morning, Prabhupada had come back a little early. So he was having breakfast, and he would have breakfast in his bedroom on a little small marble table, very low marble table, and he would sit with his back to the door between the bedroom and the darshan room. And this particular day, Krishnarupa had prepared his breakfast. So she had come, given Prabhupada the breakfast, and she was still standing there. Now, I hadn't finished cleaning, and I was, cleaning very judiciously the way Prabhupada had taught us to clean. So you have, a cloth with a lot of water, you put it over a couple of tiles, then you put the cloth back in the bucket, wrung it out really tight, then you wiped it. So I was very studiously doing this. And of course, because I wanted to be in the same room as Prabhupada, and Krishnarupa was there, I got a little slower as I went in my cleaning. And it enabled me to witness this wonderful pastime, I guess you could say, wonderful event, where Prabhupada was eating a piece of cucumber. And I had my head down, and then when I heard this noise, I looked up, and Prabhupada had made a loud spitting noise, like tch. And Krishnarupa said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, is something wrong? And Prabhupada picked up the piece of cucumber and he said, have you not tasted this? It's bitter. And she says, oh, Srila Prabhupada, should I taste it before I give to you? And he said, yes. So I thought, that's a very interesting lesson. So of course I'm still there. And eventually I had to go out of the room because I'd finished cleaning, but it was wonderful to be there with Srila Prabhupada. But then later, and Prabhupada tolerated me once again. He didn't say, what are you doing here? you know, leave. He didn't. He tolerated me. But the next morning, Bhavananda, who was then the co-director of Mayapur with Jayapataka Maharaj, made the announcement, Prabhupada said that you must clean early in the morning. Cleaning late is malecha. So before Mangalarti, then everyone would have to clean the temple room. And I felt very guilty because I felt that was my fault because I had been a little slow in getting out of that bedroom. Once again, I'm thinking a lot of these incidences where Prabhupada thinks about his God disciples, female disciples a lot, because, you know, over the years the God sisters have been, you know, somewhat not considered very nicely. But Prabhupada really loved his daughters, and Prabhupada had a cold, and Harisuri had given me a little scrap of orange silk to make into a handkerchief for Prabhupada. I didn't sew it very well. I was very, you know, neophyte devotee. I was sewing for Radha Madhava. I thought, oh, I have to sew very quickly. So I had this little scrap of silk, and I sewed it not very neatly, but gave it to Harisuri. And then Harisuri came to, and incidentally, he had given me back that handkerchief after a little time, so I still have that handkerchief. And 2 years ago, I saw Harisuri, and I said, Prabhu, do you remember that little orange handkerchief you gave me to sew for Prabhupada, that little scrap of silk? He said, oh, yes. I said, did Prabhupada actually ever use it? He said, oh, yeah, Prabhupada used it. He loved that handkerchief. And I went, really? I said, it was so horribly sewn. I feel, you know, 43 years later, I still lament that I sewed it so poorly. And he said, look, I'll tell you what happened. He said, there were a lot of sannyasis in the room, and I came in with this handkerchief to give to Prabhupada. And one of the sannyasis, and I won't mention who it was, but he was a high-profile sannyasi, was telling Srila Prabhupada what an excellent sannyasi he was. I don't talk to women, I don't look at women. I'm very fixed in my sannyas vows, and you know, which is true. And Srila Prabhupada was just looking down, and often Prabhupada would give enough rope to hang himself. So he was just quietly listening, not commenting. And then Harisuri handed this handkerchief that I had made, and Harisuri told me that Prabhupada smiled, he beamed, and he picked up the handkerchief and he addressed the sannyasis in the room. He said, and I will always accept service from my daughters. So he was very concerned about that. This story shows me, and I'm very convinced of the fact that Prabhupada knew our hearts, and so many pastimes that his disciples had, that Prabhupada knew exactly what you were thinking. And I had seen this very beautifully embroidered cartel bag of the 6 Goswamis that someone had given Prabhupada. And I thought, this is so beautiful. I want to make something as nice as that and give it to Prabhupada. And my hidden agenda was, Prabhupada will notice me. He'll say, oh, who has made this? Someone will say, oh, Krishnarupa made it. Oh, very nice. And then, you know, I feel like my life has been successful. So I had my little strategy, and I was learning jari at the time. So before I'd start sewing for Radha Madhava, I'd spend half an hour every day embroidering this cartel bag for Prabhupada. So it was finally complete, and I said to Shruti Rupa, because she was still cooking for Prabhupada with, I think, Palika, and I said, Shruti Rupa, can you give this to Prabhupada for me? And she said, no, you give it to him. I went, no way, I'm not giving this to Prabhupada. I said, okay, come with me and we'll give it to Prabhupada together. So Srila Prabhupada was sitting on a little asana, little mini vyasasana, outside on the marble corridor, on the other side of his quarters. And so, you know, in my usual modus operandi, I was hiding behind Shruti Rupa. So she had this thing, and I'm thinking, yes, and then Prabhupada would say, oh, this is very nice, who has made this? And then she'll say Krishnarupa, and then I'll stick my head out beside Shruti Rupa, and Prabhupada will say, oh, thank you very much, this is very nice. This was a scenario that was playing around in my head. So of course it didn't happen like that, because Prabhupada knew what I was motivated. And she handed the gift to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada picked it up like it was, I don't know what. And he picked it up and looked at it and looked at her and said, what is this? Internally, I was laughing my head off. I thought, oh, thank you, Prabhupada, you've really given me a very good lesson here. But the little orange handkerchief thing made up for that. Another event that happened that also showed me that Prabhupada, you know, his attention to his disciples was very deep and very great, and even to, you know, little brahmacharinis. And this must have been, I think, in 1977, and Prabhupada was unwell beginning of 77, so he spent 2 months actually in Mayapur, so either 76 or 77. And every day at 4 p.m. we would go into his room and we would have darshan for 2 hours. Yeah, 4:30 till 7. And Prabhupada would either talk or he would just chant, and we were very happy just to, you know, be in the same room as Srila Prabhupada. We, in fact, I'm sure each devotee in that room was praying that, you know, let that time be like little Brahma's, you know, day and night. It was so wonderful being there. And this one time, I was a little bit late. My service had extended a little bit late and I didn't make it in time. And I always sat in this one particular spot. And I came rushing up to Prabhupada's room. The fly screen was closed, but the door was open. And much to my dismay, I could see that the room was crowded. And my spot was taken and the room was crowded. And I must have had such a devastated look on my face. And then Prabhupada noticed me. And with just a very elegant movement of his head, he indicated that I should come around to the other side, because it had 2 entranceways. So I went pelting around the other side. And it was still quite crowded there. And when I got to the doorway, Srila Prabhupada just gestured with his hand for the devotees to move and make room for me. So even though, you know, such a teeny-weeny little devotee, Prabhupada noticed us all and was very considerate, and, you know, he could see that I had been, you know, really disappointed that I wouldn't be able to fit in that room, so he made sure that I could fit in that room. And another incident that occurred in his room, 2, and I know I have to stop. One was, Prabhupada would always have a jar of gore balls, which were coconut and gore, and they would be handed out to dignitaries. He had, in this particular incident, he had a group of his god brothers come to visit him. And I won't tell the devotee's name, I know who it was, but his job was to hand out these prasadam sweet balls to the guests as they were leaving. He got the big jar, opened it up, put his left hand in, and handed it with his left hand to Prabhupada's god brother. Prabhupada was embarrassed. And he said to his godbrothers, please excuse my Malecha disciples, they don't know. And of course this poor devotee actually I think was left-handed. So, you know, it was very embarrassing. Prabhupada apologized. And again, the devotee put his hand in with his left hand and handed out to another godbrother with his left hand. By this stage, Prabhupada was annoyed. So one has to be very careful, always give with your right hand and accept with your right hand, no matter whether you're ambidextrous or not. And referring to Prabhupada's godbrothers, there was another incident there where one devotee had just arrived from America, and he was sitting there and he was trying to praise Srila Prabhupada. But by praising Srila Prabhupada, he was doing this by negating Prabhupada's godbrothers. And in Mayapur, we were all very clear about the relationship with Prabhupada and his godbrothers. We understood very clearly what Prabhupada wanted us to do in relationship with this. And this devotee started to somewhat denigrate Prabhupada's godbrothers in trying to praise Prabhupada. And so he's saying, oh, Prabhupada, you know, you've done so much, your godbrothers did this, your godbrothers didn't do that. And all of a sudden you could feel this, it was palpable, this displeasure. And we're all sitting there in the room thinking, oh, Mother Bhumi, please open up a hole in that floor so that poor brahmachari can just disappear, because he's really displeased Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was silent for a good, you know, 50, 60 seconds. It felt longer. And he was looking down. And then he raised his head and looked at this boy. And he said, I can criticize my God brothers, but you cannot. So that was a very valuable lesson, that we understand what's the history and we understand what's the story, but we should always be respectful to all Vaishnavas. And Prabhupada exemplified that so perfectly.